Thank you very much, DJ, for those kind remarks, and thank you and to AIM for you're just wonderful hosts, and you've made our visit here so great, and I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, and to all of you who have come to listen to these remarks of mine. Okay, so once again, there's my email. Happy to talk to you through emails anytime. So, even after I'm gone, I'm leaving on Saturday, you know, still go through the emails. There are two parts of this afternoon, so you get two for the, oh my God, he's here. Jerry Seacott has arrived. Because Linda and I, the second part will have a panel consisting of Jerry Seacott, period. Because Linda has already confessed, I don't know very much about the future of the Philippines, and I've confessed long ago that I don't know very much about the Philippines, period, let alone about the future. But that's what we're going to do, but we assume everybody in the audience will have an opinion, so we can discuss these issues. So that's the second half. The first half is just me doing my thing, and as you can see, it's going to be on third world immigration. Written here as will they vanish within high-wage countries, and I'll take the US as the example. And I'm going to tell you a story draped with some economics and some evidence that gives you my view of what's happened in mass migrations since World War II out there. And I'll do it a lot there'll be a lot of Asia in this, but also Latin America and the Middle East and so on. When I'm doing this, both in terms of the evidence of performance of out-migration from places like the Philippines, you should be thinking about, is the Philippines an exception to this general rule? And if it is, why is it an exception to the general rule? And when we get to the second half of the afternoon and start talking about Philippine future, that might be part of the conversation, whether Philippine out-migration will behave any differently in the future than we think it will for the rest of what we call the third world. So that is where I'm going. As usual, I begin with this advertisement. What I'm talking to you about today results from work I've done with my friend Tim Hatton. And there's this great book we produced out there. It's not in your library, by the way. I checked out this afternoon. You should make sure that that's added. And we put that together 5 years ago or so. It's in paperback now, so I bet you can find it, Amazon.com. And as I say, if you go out and buy enough of these, it'll help me finance my grandchildren's college education that's coming up. So I'd appreciate that, and Nancy would appreciate that. Let me start with some non-facts. And these non-facts, it's especially important to talk about these non-facts, I think, with American analysts who are looking at the inflows. It may be less important to talk to you about it since you're involved in the outflows, but we'll see whether that's true. Here's the first big non-fact, and there are others, but there's the best example. Lant Pritchett, a World Bank guru, a very, very smart guy, wrote this book that came out of the Center for Global Development, CGD, 4 or 5 years ago. And basically, the key premise underlying the book is that the supply of labor of all sorts to the US and the EU is perfectly elastic. And so all the US or the EU has to do is simply turn on or shut the tap, and they'll get all the immigrants they want. And he's talking about the long run. I take issue with this I don't think that this is going to be the way the world is going to look over the next 3 or 4 decades. And so I think they're very wrong, that Lant and others like him are very wrong in this issue, and it matters a lot, as I think you will agree. So let's see how I reach that conclusion in looking at some evidence. So that was non-fact number 1. Non-fact number 2, which is, again, important to remind Americans of this, but helpful to remind you, but it's important to talk about this non-fact because Americans view the U.S. has always been an immigrant nation. That's why we're so good at it, absorbing immigrants. That's why we have fewer problems, it appears, than Germany and other countries that have immigrants in their midst. Well, we have not always been an immigrant nation. Did you know this? It's important to remember that because we may stop being an immigrant nation sometime in the future. And if we're panicked, and other high-wage regions in the OECD are getting very elderly, if we're panicked about a choke-off in the supply of immigrants to our labor markets, we need only remember we've done it before. We've done it twice. So let's look at those 2 times. When the Pilgrims fled persecution and finally come to Massachusetts in 1620, from there are 250 years, almost 250 years, up to the middle of the 19th century, or 1848, when the first big rush of immigrants comes to the U.S. from Ireland, driven by famine, potato famine and all that. Between those 2 dates, immigrants were not important in the U.S. economy, with one exception: slaves, black African slaves, important in the American South, but for the others, they were not important. It was not a nation of immigrants at all. Why is that? Well, the U.S. starts taking a census after we successfully survived a revolution with Britain and got independence. One of the first things we do is take a census in 1790. You have to make a head count so that you can know who's voting for whom and what the voting power had to be in that democracy. So by 1840, you've had 5 of them. And when that census is taken, it counts, as you can see right there, only 3% of Americans were immigrants. That's pretty small. Pretty small, given that today it's more than 15%. We're in a totally different place now. America is a nation of immigrants now. It wasn't then. Why wasn't it a nation of immigrants when that census was taken in 1840? Well, the reason: it was so expensive to make the move across the Atlantic. Few people could afford it. Certainly, most poor Europeans couldn't make the move across, and so they did not until they had absolutely no choice and were pushed out by a potato famine. Second, no problem, the Americans bred like rabbits. I mean, if you think family sizes are large in the Philippines and your population growth is high and fertility is high, you haven't seen anything. 12 children per married woman, quite common in the U.S. at that time. Of course, they all didn't survive, but more did, proportionate-wise, than I think they do in the Philippines now. In any case, it was a very different era, and America was for Americans in 1840. And then everything changed. It changed from there up to 1913. And then we enter a new era. And the new era is from 1910, or just prior to World War I. The war itself chokes off immigration because there aren't any boats available for people to get on. They're all being torpedoed by submarines or being used to move troops and munitions. And after the war, the U.S. imposes quotas. So for the first time, the U.S., and it's the first time, I think, anywhere in the world, the U.S. starts imposing restrictions and quotas on immigration. Cuts the numbers down. Number one. Number two, it's very racist. And there are Philippine loopholes, but basically Asians need not apply. And in Australia, it's yellow peril, you know. So Asia is excluded from the high-wage labor markets. So it's a racist policy which is asymmetric on who gets a chance to get in and who doesn't. And there's a restriction on the numbers. And that takes place over this period until the 1960s, when the law is changed in the US in 1965. But when John F. Kennedy is full of rhetoric, who's pushing for the legislation, he dies before it happens, but pushing for the legislation in 1965, the rhetoric he's using is, we are a nation of immigrants and da-da-da-da, all that stuff. And it's about 4% of America is immigrants, not unlike the 1840 census. So it kind of returned the quotas, a Great Depression, 2 world wars, had set America back to a position of pretty much everybody's American, not many immigrants, that we were in that census of 1840. So there are 2 episodes in which the U.S. Had to go it on their own with very few very few immigrants in the system. By immigrants, what we're describing, of course, is any resident in the U.S. Who says, I was born in Manila or somewhere else outside of the U.S. Okay, so the question is, could that happen again? We've done it twice. Could that happen again? And I think the answer is, well, I think probably, as we'll see. I talked about that. Okay, so those are 2 non-facts. Here's a real fact. And that is what's been happening over the past 2 years or so with the Great Recession is not new. That has been repeated in the past. There's a lot of volatility in our history, every country's history. And they illustrate what is called, what Tim Hatton and I call the 10% rule. And that is there will be a predictable reaction in any world crisis to what it does to mass migrations. And that's where the 10% rule comes in. The international migrations have always been sensitive because it's the timing of migration. Whether or not I intend to move from Manila to Chicago is dictated by the fact that there are higher paying jobs there. But if you go through a year or two when there's high unemployment rates, I have a very low chance of getting those good jobs. So I wait. I don't move. So the timing of my move is totally dictated by unemployment conditions abroad. And usually immigrants are the first ones that get hit by those unemployment conditions, whether you're an illegal or illegal. So most young males and females who intend to leave will wait until the time is right to make the move. It would be stupid to leave when you're going to be unemployed in Chicago. So you want to wait where your chances are that you'll be employed well. So the state of the labor market in the receiving region is really critical. It's more critical for immigrants than it is actually for resident Americans. That fact creates much more volatility in migration than all the variables that influence migration. Unemployment, GDP growth and decline, and all the rest, as we'll see. It's a margin that exhibits much more volatility, like foreign capital flows as well. So foreign capital flows and foreign labor flows exhibit much more volatility than the things to which they're responding.